Whenever we go in the studio, I try to make something much better than the last thing I created. You know what I'm saying? So they're, in my opinion, a lot better than the last shit I produced. You know what I'm saying? It's just that. That's just something that I believe in. I believe an artist or producer or whoever should try to top themselves every time they go out there, and that's what I try to do.
No other rap artist in the world of hip-hop has constructed as successful and as solid a reputation as Dr. Dre.
The control is in the studio, where he calls the shots.
Renowned for being one of the founding fathers of gangsta rap, he has been revered for bringing innovation and slick technique to the world of hip-hop since the late 80s.
Dre's place in the history of hip-hop is unarguable. He's clearly one of the most important producers and one of the most important creative forces that the music's ever seen.
He enriched the genre through his stern commitment and innate ability to recognize musical talent as he coached and paved the way for hip-hop legends such as Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Kendrick Lamar.
If you don't have that sound that just makes them say yay, you're gonna keep making hooks. The hook's not right, okay, we need to change the verse, okay, we need to add this. He's like that.
Dr. Dre's clinical approach to making music, coupled with his notorious perfectionist ethic, has gained respect in the studio, divided music critics, and more often than not, left fans thirsting for more.
He's been working on Detox for 15 years, and he still doesn't feel it's good enough. So it remains to be seen if it's ever going to see the light of day.
With only 3 studio albums of his own punctuated by long interludes, the balance between Dr. Dre's science as a producer and the artistic impact of his own musical evolution still fascinates to this day.
If you ask a group of people what hustle is, you're probably going to get a lot of different answers. What I think is doing whatever you need to do to become successful.
Discover his driven journey from the depths of the ghetto to the heights of the studio. In Dr. Dre, Another Beat. In the current era of hip-hop, no producer is as innovative, as composed, and as polished as Dr. Dre. A self-described perfectionist, Dre creates beats and songs that not only glamorize the gangsta lifestyle, but also warn against it, acknowledging hard work and self-determination as the main motivators behind his success. Pairing this with big drums, distinct keyboard riffs, and a magnificent mix, he has built a benchmark sound that many beatmakers aim for when mixing down their music. Critics have hailed him as one of the most valuable figures in the hip-hop world that aspiring artists should look up to. Throughout a self-selected career spanning over 2 decades, Dre has become one of the most influential producers of all time. And in recent years, Dre's meteoric rise to the top of hip-hop encouraged his entrepreneurial spirit to venture into building his own commercial billion-dollar business. Along with record industry executive Jimmy Iovine, the two founded Beats Electronics, a headphone and speaker brand. This established Dre's universal influence across the corporate business infrastructure of the industry at present. And now he is one of the richest men in the music industry with an estimated net worth of $700 million. Dre is now using the commercial success of his latest album, Compton, to support and fund a creative center in his gang-ridden hometown that has catapulted him to stardom. After 16 years, Compton the album replaced the abandoned Detox project with a rich soundtrack of uproar, self-sacrifice, and strong will, inspired by the forthcoming N.W.A. biopic that takes Romelle Young back to the area code that made his name.
Well, Dr. Dre's name when he was born was Andre Romelle Young. He's actually the child of 2 singers. Both his mother and father were singers. They split up, and when he was a young boy still, he was living with his mother. They moved around an awful lot. At one point, they ended up in a very dodgy part of Los Angeles called Compton, where he was very much exposed to the kind of gangster life that he would later on, of course, go on to write about in his music.
I mean, a lot of people don't know this. My mom was pregnant with me at the age of 15. Man, she was always told by family, friends, neighbors, or whatever, she's gonna ruin her life and mine. And give me a second. So throughout my entire childhood, being a success was always embedded in my head because those people that were saying that shit could not be right.
Steering clear of the gang and gun violence that was rife in his hometown, the young Dre eventually dropped out of school to pursue his career as a DJ, rapper, and later, the world's most influential hip-hop producer. Dr. Dre's initial flirtation with beats started out in his local nightclub, Eve After Dark, which he would often revisit to watch DJs and rappers perform live. Dr. Dre himself later went on to become a DJ in the club, where he also met aspiring rapper Antoine Carabee, later known as DJ Yella of N.W.A. In 1984, they formed the musical group World Class Wreckin Cru. The group would become an icon in the electronic hip-hop scene that dominated the early 1980s West Coast hip-hop. Dre and Yella recorded several demos in the studio, and in their first recording session, they recorded a song called Surgery. The release of this first single, prominently featuring Dr. Dre on the turntable, would also become the group's first hit, selling 50,000 copies within the Compton area.
Now, this is his first ever group. This is before N.W.A, and this is called World Class Wreckin Cru. He's a really young guy. He's actually a teenager at the time, and in this video, you can see him on the decks in like a red, shiny, almost looks plastic suit. The lead singer's in gold lame with no shirt on, dancing around, and they look like a kind of cheesy, tacky version of the Four Tops. And it looks very Soul Train, it looks very dated, certainly a far cry from the image that he would later project, but it's really fun to see where this global international billionaire superstar started out.
Dr. Dre, Dr. Dre, Dr. Boom, 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 boom.
Dre and the World Class Wreckin Cru, I never really listened to them that much, but Dre was like, you know, major R&B, and then suddenly he became this guy who was behind the boards.
As Dre started performing with World Class Wreckin Cru at parties and clubs around South Central Los Angeles, it wasn't long until he started to become fully involved in hip-hop. In 1986, he met Ice Cube, and the two rappers began writing songs for Ruthless Records, a label that was established by former self-confessed drug dealer Eazy-E and businessman Jerry Heller. When Eazy tried to give one of the duo's songs, Boys in the Hood, to HBO, a group signed to Ruthless, and was turned down, Eazy teamed with Dre and Cube, forming N.W.A, an acronym for Niggas with Attitude. With established music producer Jerry Heller behind them, N.W.A were destined to take the hip-hop world by storm.
He had a belief in them that what they were doing was part of the same sort of rebel rock and roll tradition of the artists that he knew and that he'd grown up with and worked with perhaps in some cases. He felt that what they were doing was important and also felt that there was money to be made there. And you put him alongside Eazy and Dre and Ice Cube and Ren and Yella as well, and you have something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
They released their first album in 1987, and a year later, Dre hit the world with real hardcore rap when he and N.W.A stamped onto the music scene with their debut studio album Straight Outta Compton, a vicious hardcore record. It became an underground hit that received no support from mainstream radio, the press, or MTV.
People tend to think of N.W.A as the foundation stone of gangster rap. They probably weren't the first people to do that. Ice-T had had a record out before then. Schoolie D over in Philadelphia had been making records that had what we would now think of as gangster rap content before N.W.A came about. But N.W.A really took it from being something that was off to one side and in the margins and made it a really huge mainstream thing.
Rolling Stone magazine described the N.W.A record as a hardship documentary of LA ghetto life that includes gangbangs, drive-by shootings, and police sweeps. The group portrayed themselves as underground street reporters and glamorized street life, militant resistance to authority, and blatant sexist violence through their hard-hitting lyrics and provocative performance.
I had some problems with N.W.A. I had some problems with them. They were the first ones to use the N-word on a rap record. in the way they used it. I remember the first time I heard Straight Outta Compton. I was shocked. I was totally shocked. I couldn't believe anyone would actually put that on a record. And I didn't realize that all they were doing was kind of reprogramming people. They were ready, they were determined to reprogram people into an extreme ghetto mindset.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Straight out of Compton, crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube. From the gang called niggas with attitudes. When I'm called off, I got a sawed off. Squeeze the trigger and bodies are hauled off. You too, boy, if you fuck with me. The police are gonna have to come and get me off your ass. That's how I'm going out.
Well, the video for Straight Outta Compton really shows the guys walking around Compton, which is where they're from. And you see Ice Cube, you know, angry as per usual, talking about the police, come and get us, you know, and just being really angry. You see a map of Compton at one point where they're kind of showing their neighborhood. They're proud of their neighborhood, despite the fact that Compton has a terrible reputation in terms of crime and poverty. These guys are saying, you know, there's more to it than that. And we're from Compton and we're proud of it. And it's a very low budget video. I mean, you see them basically walking around their neighborhood. It doesn't look like there's a high production value on this yet. But you have to remember, the guys weren't massive, huge, international, multi-selling, you know, artists at this point yet.
After releasing the single Straight Outta Compton, N.W.A. went on to release one of their most notorious hits, Fuck the Police, which explored the political tension between black youth and police officials and was an instant success. The song provoked the FBI to write to N.W.A.'s record company about the lyrics, arguing that the song misrepresented police. The widespread attention triggered by the song's controversial content was indicative of the group's growing universal popularity.
The music, the lyrics, the attitude of this band at that time was angry. It was angry, it was frustrated, and it was against the system. And this was the first time that we saw such blatant anti-establishment in the mainstream. In fact, there was virtually no radio play for this band at the very beginning because radio stations were afraid to play these songs. There were so many curse words and other things that were deemed to be dangerous, they didn't dare put it on their playlist. But despite that, the public went mad for it. They became massively successful. And I think the song Express Yourself, even though if you watch the video, what you're seeing is people expressing themselves through crime and, you know, running from the police, not necessarily a model of good society. But if you listen to the lyrics, you know, it talks about not doing drugs. It talks about causes brain damage. It talks about, you know, expressing yourself. It is, I believe it's a very positive message in some ways because it's encouraging, in this case, most likely, young black people in difficult neighborhoods where there's racial tension and poverty to express themselves. And in a way, you know, finding an outlet through music, which would be something as an alternative to the crime and the gangs that they see all around them. In the video for Express Yourself, you see the members of the group kind of running from the police, and you see what's going on is not really a happy picture. But what you should understand, and I think what they're trying to show the world, is that this is their reality, this is their life. And for young people growing up in these neighborhoods, this is what they see every day.
With my full capabilities, and now I'm living in correctional facilities. Cause some don't agree with how I do this. I get straight and meditate like a Buddhist. I'm dropping flavor, my behavior is hereditary, but my technique is very necessary. Blame it on Ice Cube, because he said it get funky when you got a subject and a predicate.
Although Straight Outta Compton brought blockbuster success to N.W.A., all was not well within the group.
The famous point at which the group basically starts to disintegrate is when Cube is presented with a contract and a check for a six-figure sum that he can cash when he signs the contract. And he decides not to sign the contract. And then other people get involved. Cube begins to use N.W.A.'s press agent as his manager. And extricates himself from the group situation.
Cube departed in late 1989 amid many financial disagreements. Although Eazy-E seemed to be the undisputed leader following Cube's departure, the music production was in Dre's hands. N.W.A. went on to release another record without Ice Cube. But was N.W.A. still the same without their lyrical mastermind?
They made that record without Ice Cube, and that put paid to their career. It did. I reviewed that record, and man, I gave it 3 out of 10. And in retrospect, I wasn't fair, but you know, it had some really horrible tracks on it. Find 'em, fuck 'em, and flee. You know, things like that. A track about the killing of a prostitute. All sorts of things like that. They really, you know, they thought, okay, we've done Straight Outta Compton and Ice Cube's left. Oh, we're up Shit's Creek. What can we do? We're going to push the envelope out further. And they did. And it was terrible at the time to hear it. But now, if you listen to that record now, it's a classic record because of Dr. Dre.
On both the 1990 EP, 100 Miles and Runnin', and the 1991 album, Niggas for Life, Dre produced dense, funky sonic landscapes that still kept N.W.A. at the top of the charts. While the group was at the peak of its popularity in 1991, Dre began to make efforts to leave the crew, especially after he was charged with assaulting Dee Barnes.
In 1991, Dr. Dre was at a music industry party when he assaulted a female television journalist with Fox News. He didn't like the way she reported Ice Cube's leaving N.W.A. He didn't like what she said. And according to her, he grabbed her and slammed her face against a wall several times near a stairwell. Later on, a very unapologetic Dr. Dre at the time said, you know, he's like fucking threw her down the stairs. It was an aggressive, unacceptable display of violence towards women that Dr. Dre would later go on to say that he deeply regretted. But unfortunately, there were several incidences of violence against women by Dr. Dre around this time in his career. A former girlfriend, singer Michelle, accused him of physical abuse during their time together, and a former label mate called Terry B also claimed that he assaulted her at a post-Grammy party. So there were several incidences where Dr. Dre was accused of violence towards women, and I think the fact that this wasn't shown in the film Straight Outta Compton caused a fair amount of controversy, particularly from women's groups who felt that it had been whitewashed from the story and as if in some way excused. Dr. Dre has been very public and very contrite in recent days, actually, recent months, where he has said very publicly in magazines like Rolling Stone and also in the New York Times how much he deeply regrets what happened, how he's no longer the man he was, and how he will remember for the rest of his life the mistakes he made in his past. There's no question that Dr. Dre is not the man that did those things, but unfortunately, they very much are a part of his history.
After the controversy of Dre's abuse had been exposed, N.W.A. hit the headlines with yet more negative press. Over the next few years, Dre and Eazy engaged in a highly publicized feud, which included both rappers attacking each other on their solo albums. Dre left N.W.A. in 1992 and paired up with Suge Knight to create Death Row Records label. According to legend, Knight held N.W.A.'s manager at gunpoint and threatened to kill him if he refused to let Dre out of his contract.
Dr. Dre felt gangster rap was over. He felt like that kind of angry, frustrated theme had come to a close. He wanted to do something different. The members of N.W.A. disagreed with him and they parted ways. When Dr. Dre went over to Suge Knight's label, he started G-Funk, which was a really different sound. It always had a much stronger melody and one or two notes that would kind of repeat all the way through. It wasn't so much shouting, and it was more almost kind of singing, and it was certainly more musically based than the other was. But additionally, it wasn't quite so angry. You know, you had songs like Ain't Nothing But a G Thing and California Love, which are actually positive, uplifting. California Love is like an anthem to California. And these were early songs that Dre produced in that kind of G-Funk vibe.
His debut, The Chronic instantly became the overarching force in mid-90s hip-hop. Most rap records started to imitate its sound, and his productions for Doggy Dogg and Blackstreet were instant massive hits.
One thing that you can't take away from The Chronic is that it took a sound and made it hugely successful, popularised it globally, and it did have a transformative impact on hip-hop that was to follow. It's generally regarded as the record that marks the end of hip-hop's golden age. Some people feel that the golden age begins in about 1987 in New York with certain records that established a gritty sound based on James Brown and similar funk samples, and that this period of the music sort of mushrooming creativity where there's constant evolution and constant changes in lyrics, styles, production techniques, attitudes to the way the music is made, that kind of reaches its zenith in 1992, at which The Chronic marks the sort of the end point at which hip-hop is established now as a mainstream pop music genre, and the emphasis tends to shift away a little bit from this urge to create something new and dynamic and forward-moving all the time, and starts to become more about an industry capitalising on what it knows it already can sell.
On The Chronic, he had all the South Central rappers who mattered at the time on the record.
In the spring of 1992, Dre released his first solo single, Deep Cover, a record that was going to leave an indelible print on the G-Funk sound. It cemented the launch of a strong collaboration with rapper Snoop Doggy Dogg, who Dre discovered through his stepbrother Warren G. Thanks to the singles Nothing But a G Thang and Dre Day, as well as the release of his collaboration with Tupac on California Love, Dre was now the #1 producer in the industry.
The video for California Love, which of course features Tupac Shakur as well, shows Dre and Tupac in these kind of metallic leather ensembles, which looks very Mad Max and kind of apocalyptic in style. And you see them singing about really California, which is where they're both from, and they talk about every part. They talk about San Diego to the Bay, meaning San Francisco, and they talk about the kind of the way California parties.
Everybody to the Wild Wild West, a state that's untouchable like Elliot Ness. The track hits your eardrum like a slug to your chest, like a vest for your Jimmy in the city of sex. We in that sunshine state where the bomb ass him be, the state where you never find a dance floor empty and pimp speed. On a mission for them greens, lean, mean, money making machines serving fiends.
Dre directed several of the videos for the singles from The Chronic. Nothing But a G Thing was a very influential video. It was the perfect video for the track. It just shows a bunch of guys hanging out, having a party and a good time, because that's what the song's about. I think one of the things that gets missed about that record, and one of the things that struck me at the time, was that in many respects that was the black American equivalent of what Kurt Cobain was doing with Smells Like Teen Spirit for white America. It's not a record that says you should try and live this life because it's really cool. It's just a record that says, here's the life we're living. And the video for G Thing reinforced those themes of the lyrics of the song. It's aimless, it's directionless, but everyone seems to be having a good time despite the relative accrual of wealth. It was very down home, it was very earthy. It wasn't particularly something that you would choose to pattern your own life on, but it was kind of saying, if this is what you've got, then isn't that enough? And that was quite a positive thing, quite an empowering thing for people to hear and to see.
And that's realer than real deal, holy feel. And now you hookers and hoes know how I feel. Well, if it's good enough to get broke off a proper chunk, I take a small piece of some of that funky stuff. It's like this and like that and like this, and it's like that and like this and like that, and it's like this and like that and like this, and Drake creep to the mic like a fan.
Well, I'm peeping and I'm creeping and I'm creeping, but I damn near got caught because my beeper kept beeping.
Dr. Dre is a fantastic, phenomenal producer, and one of his greatest skills is his ability to talent spot. Dre discovered Snoop Dogg and turned him really into the mega global superstar that he became. Ain't Nothing But a G Thing really highlights Snoop's breathy almost, kind of lyrical voice and the way he raps and rhymes. And Dre saw innately that he was on to some superstar talent and highlighted that in the song.
When Dre found Snoop, he obviously understood that here was potentially somebody who could really take the idea of gangster rap and translate it to a much wider audience. There was something about Snoop as a character, as a personality, that you can hear on the records, even in the way that he rapped right at the beginning of his career. Very sing-songy, very lilting. He came across in a very engaging, very innocent sounding kind of a way, yet he was talking about some really dark and difficult things. Dre understood intuitively exactly what Snoop would be able to achieve. And you put that voice and that style along with Dre's approach to music at the time, and you've got a very potent combination, and the two of them together made records that were obviously always likely to achieve wide appeal, but they took something that in terms of its content was very challenging, very difficult, and they made it into pop music, and that was unprecedented.
I interviewed Dr. Dre himself on the tour bus on the way to the concert at Brixton Academy. And Dr. Dre, he was more forthright. He's like, boom. Even though on the bus too, while he was trying to talk in a forthright manner, the others, you know, it wasn't just Snoop Dogg, it was a whole load of death row people and people affiliated with them. They were really merciless. I think they were trying to put Dr. Dre off so he would say something out of off-color. They wanted them to talk about women. Let's just put it nicely, women. That's what they want. Because of the nature of the albums, they wanted it to be as realistic in that sense as possible, as if the actual characters on the record are the same as their projections. They're not. Dre's really chill, and Snoop Dogg too, chill.
Not only did he produce Snoop's 1993 debut Doggy Style, but he orchestrated several film soundtracks and helmed hit records such as Blackstreet's No Diggity, among others, including a hit reunion with Ice Cube, Natural Born Killers. During this entire time, Dre released no new records, but he didn't need to. All of Death Row was under his control, and most of his peers imitated his style. The Death Row dynasty held strong until the spring of 1996, when Dre grew frustrated with Knight's aggressive ways. Dre left the label in the summer of 1996 to form Aftermath, when he declared that gangsta rap was dead. While he was the target of many taunts from his former Death Row colleagues, their sales slipped by 1997, and Knight was imprisoned on racketeering charges by the end of the year. Dre's first Various Artists compilation album, Dr. Dre Presents The Aftermath, received considerable media attention, but the record did not have the same impact as his hit single, Been There, Done That. Even though the album wasn't a massive hit, the collapse of Death Row in 1997 proved that Dre's instincts were correct at the time. The turning point for Aftermath came in 1998, when Jimmy Iovine, the head of Aftermath's parent label Interscope, suggested that Dr. Dre sign Eminem, a white rapper from Detroit.
Well, one of the best stories I think about Dre and Eminem's collaboration was at the very beginning, the first time that Eminem actually came into the studio. Dre had called in some of his friends to hear this new guy that he had talent spotted and wanted them to take a listen to. Eminem walked in at the time and didn't really look the part, to say the least. You know, at the time, Marshall Mathers had no money. He'd been wearing an outfit, like a jumpsuit, which was bright yellow, that he'd been given by some promotional company, had no money to buy any other clothes, so had been wearing it for like a week, the same ensemble. He stunk, he looked ridiculous. One of the guys sitting there said he looked like Tweety Bird, and they were all laughing at him. These were, you know, really serious rap producers who thought he looked like a joke. They called him Tweety Bird. But as soon as Eminem went behind the mic, got in the studio and started rapping, you could have heard a pin drop in that room. The guys were all like, whoa. And they immediately recognized the incredible talent that Dr. Dre had spotted.
When you first met, this is a question for both of you, what did you think of each other, honestly? I thought he was a fucking dick. And he probably thought worse of me.
I thought he was Tweety Bird. No, because he had this he had this real bright fucking yellow sweatsuit on.
Man, if I hear one more thing about that goddamn sweatsuit. I had this yellow outfit on when I first met Dre. It was like this outfit that a clothing company had given me, and I didn't have money like some people had at the time. You know, so I was going on a week wearing it, so it was actually turning kind of green. But he called me a banana when he met me, so it was on from there.
Dre produced 3 songs and provided vocals for 2 on Eminem's successful and controversial debut album, the Slim Shady LP, released in 1999. The Dr. Dre produced lead single from that album, My Name Is, brought Eminem to public attention for the first time.
Hi, my name is. How'd you come up with that concept?
I figured like my name was, and then I came up with it. Now Dre, like it was really ill because the first day me and Dre got down together, we did 3 songs, and My Name Is was the second song that we did, and we was in there. It was like he played me the beat, and it was like instantly I just started saying it, like, you know, the beat started talking to me like, hi, my name, like I started like doing the hook, and he looked at me kind of funny like, you gonna use that as a hook, you know? It was like. And the more I started saying it, the engineers in the studio started saying it, you know what I'm saying? Everybody was like, oh, hi, my name is. And I was like, yo, that's him right there. So I just went in and like freestyled some verses, and then I hadn't had them wrote yet, and just went home that same night and just wrote them and then came back the next day.
The Slim Shady LP experienced immense success, reaching number 2 on the Billboard 200 and received universal acclaim from critics, reviving Aftermath's commercial ambitions and viability.
The other thing that often gets forgotten about is that Eminem happened along at a point where Dre really needed to find him. Over the years, he's made records that have been a lot less artistically valid or successful than appeared on that Aftermath compilation album. But it wasn't this super stratospheric hit. Now, who knows? If Eminem hadn't come along to find his mojo again, if you like, to get back to the top of his game commercially speaking, would we be talking today about this long career? Would we have had the 2001 album? Would we have had Compton? Would we have had this wait for Detox? Would that narrative have been the same? I very much doubt it. So the idea of some new blood coming into the mix, a new discovery, a sort of a new Snoop, if you like, someone who will come along and take that role in his life, be a muse for him musically, and who will also have the same relationship back with him, and who will be able to come out of his beats and take them into some other place. It was absolutely vital that it happened at the time that it did.
Dre, to be honest, was trying to throw a spanner into the works by bringing in Eminem. Eminem is, you know, I like the Slim Shady record. Yeah, that was okay. But the one I like is the Marshall Mathers record, where he's really terrible. He's like some sort of crazed bulldog, and he's doing it with a laugh. And you know, that's the one. That's the one. By the time they got to that one, their collaboration had become, you know, really cemented, and Eminem had been absorbed into the hip-hop process to that extent. Dr. Dre actually didn't get that much out of his partnership with Eminem because Dr. Dre is already established. He didn't need to cross over to Middle America because Middle America is already hip-hop. I mean, there are so many people who are hip-hop, even though they're Middle Americans, they were the ones buying hip-hop. So it's more a case of Dr. Dre throwing it back at the people who were buying his records than anything else, because really, he didn't need to sign Eminem. Eminem sold as many records as he sold, but we actually were also underestimating the influence of Jimmy Iovine in this, who's the head of, the label head, Interscope Records. And Jimmy Iovine is a big old rock producer, and he might have twisted Dre's arm a little. He might have just twisted his arm a little that, yeah, okay, get me an Eminem.
Released on November 16, 1999, Dr. Dre's second solo album, 2001, was considered an explosive, authentic return to his gangster rap roots.
It's a brilliant record. It's like a summation of his career, and it was not sad, but it was slightly disheartening to find out afterwards that Dr. Dre didn't actually write his own lyrics, and that someone like Jay-Z was actually spoon-feeding Dr. Dre lyrics. But Mad Skillz too, I think, had a hand in that record, because Mad Skillz he's like one of the top ghost writers. The whole thing is ghost writers. But Dre sounds amazing on the record, better than he sounded on the records before, because Dre was just like over the years trying to get more and more into an MC that would be respected. But you can't necessarily be respected as an MC if you don't write your own lyrics. This is the hidden side of hip-hop. Ghost writers and people writing lyrics for other people. It's a hidden side. People don't get the credit they deserve for writing those lyrics, because mostly the credits go to the producers and go to the musicians. And Dr. Dre is a producer, and he didn't really have to do anything other than actually, just be in his own studio. So he was relaxed. He's really relaxed, and he said as many things as he could on that album. 2001 is still a great record. You can still hear the times in the record, and that was when it was Millennium Fever. That's why he called it 2001.
The album included smash hit Still Dre and featured numerous collaborators and was highly successful.
In the video for Still Dre, you see Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg driving around LA with a car that's got the wheels kind of jacked up and bouncing. You see this a lot in LA. I mean, I used to live there, and I would literally see people driving around like this all the time. And it's just kind of a tribute to Los Angeles and the culture. You see Snoop get out, and he's in his baby blue tracksuit kind of thing, and he's cool and casual. And Dre and he are having a great time driving around LA with their honeys in the back seat. It's a very, I think it's a very typical, kind of very fun look at Los Angeles at the time.
All across the world. Still hitting them corners and them lolos, girl.
Still taking my time to perfect the beat, and I still got love for the streets. It's the DRE.
Representing for them gangsters all across the world.
Still
hitting them corners and them lolos, girl.
Still taking my time to perfect the beat, and I still got love for the street.
2001 is probably the one example in his career where he has just done what, in many respects, would have been advisable for him to do most of the rest of the time, which is just get his head down, finish a record, get it out. It was a record that wasn't something that people had been talking about for years, and because the previous album had been a relative commercial flop, then it wasn't a record that perhaps came freighted with quite so much pressure of expectations of high sales. So it sold very well. The music on it was pretty excellent for the most part. It had people on it who were already established stars, who he'd helped make established stars, and who clearly were enjoying being back working with him in this kind of what one might term traditional way, rather than just having Dre come in and do a beat for a track on an album that was otherwise pulled together from other sources. This was a Dre record. He was in charge. He did it his way, and it worked.
So fuck y'all, all of y'all. If y'all don't like me, blow me. Y'all are gonna keep fucking around with me and turn me back to the old me.
Nowadays, everybody wanna talk like they got something to say, but nothing comes out when they move their lips. Just a bunch of gibberish, and motherfuckers act like they forgot about Dre.
In the video for Forgot About Dre, you see Dre rapping, and you can hear the music, and you kind of know that Eminem is coming in eventually. And of course he does. You know, you see Dre looking at a newspaper or magazine article with Eminem's picture on it, saying how Eminem had won an award, and all of a sudden Eminem starts speaking and rapping out of the picture. And all of a sudden he emerges, and the two of them are having some kind of crazy drunken night out where Eminem ends up vomiting in some old lady's flower bed. She becomes angry, and then there's a fire. What's interesting to me about the video is halfway through they switch to like a live news report where the reporter is actually interviewing a drunk Eminem about what actually transpired. Then they go back to the music video. So it's an unusual technique. It's not something I've seen before. It's not a high production glossy video. It's a simple telling of a story. Dre's talking about how he's changed from the old Dre and how people are resentful of the success that he has now and sometimes trying to bring him down.
So where's all the mad rappers at? It's like a jungle in its habitat. But all you savage cats know that I was strapped with gas when you were cuddling a cabbage patch.
Nowadays, everybody wanna talk like they got something to say, but nothing comes out when they move their lips. Just a bunch of gibberish, and motherfuckers act like they forgot about Dre.
During the course of 2001's undeniable popularity, Dr. Dre was involved in several lawsuits. Lucasfilm Limited, the film company behind the Star Wars film franchise, sued him over the use of the THX trademarked Deep Note.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. I'm sure there's a few people who also want to talk a bit about the Lucas lawsuits. Let's get this out of the way now. You're also being sued by George Lucas.
Yeah, there's a sound. There's a sound at the beginning of my album. It's a THX sound. I originally used his sound, and I tried to get it cleared, and they said they wouldn't clear it, so I said fuck it, and went back in the studio and created my own sound. Now they're saying it sounds similar, and which it does. It sounds similar, but it's my sound that we created in the studio. So that's what the lawsuit was about. And I believe we're going to end up settling, and they're going to get what I was offering them in the first place.
The online music file sharing company Napster also settled a lawsuit with him and heavy metal rock band Metallica in the summer of 2001, agreeing to block access to material that artists do not want to have shared on the network.
What Napster did is enable people to get the music that I work hard for nothing. You know what I'm saying? What they're basically doing is taking food out of my kid's mouth. You know what I'm saying? Straight up. They, in my opinion, I believe if Napster succeeds with what they're going to do, you're never going to hear any new music because there's not any artists that are going to want to go in the studio and record if their music is being given away for free.
It's like, what is the whole element of somebody putting out an album and building a hype around it, somebody being anxious to hear someone's album? It's like we might as well, like me and Dre might as well cut a song and put it right on the internet before it comes out. Like, here you go. This is the song we just did. You know, why don't we just put it song by song? If Napster continues, it's gonna be like nobody's gonna want to keep making music anymore because it's like everybody is gonna get it for free. So what's the point in making the music? It's like, you know, you make the music from your heart and you spend hours in the studio and then somebody just gets it for free. It's like you're working for free. Like, here, you can't support your kids or nothing because they want to, you know, they're basically taking your music for free.
Straight up, but I don't think there's anybody in this room that wants to go to work and not expect to see a paycheck in return. Straight up, this is my job. This is what I do for a living.
Would you have used an outlet like Napster now if you were just starting out and you had a demo tape and no one was listening to your music and no record companies were calling you back? Would you jump on there and try and promote your music that way, though? Do you think there's a positive aspect to young artists through the internet and downloading music?
Yes, I do think that's a positive thing about it if it's done that way. But they're taking our music that we spend money on, hard work and time, and we're professionals with this, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And they're just giving it away.
Following the impact of his 2001 album, Dr. Dre invested his energy in making songs and albums for other artists. He co-produced 6 tracks on Eminem's landmark Marshall Mathers LP. The album itself earned a Grammy and proved to be the fastest-selling rap album of all time. He also signed R&B singer Truth Hurts to Aftermath in 2001.
He is the man with the production. So once we came together, it was like, wow. It was like fireworks. It was like, you know, my lyric and melody and his production thing. And
it's just a vibe I get, you know. Of course they have to have a serious talent, but sometimes you need a little bit more than that. You can have a person that's seriously talented and they can be an asshole, you know what I mean? So I have to find somebody that has a serious talent and I can vibe with them in the studio. The person that I work with, I have to see myself maybe leaving the studio and going out to eat with them and not being irritated, you know what I'm saying? And vice versa, they have to be able to get along with me and accept my personality, you know what I mean? So that's pretty much it for me. If we can vibe together, we can have fun together, and you have a talent, I'm gonna bring the best out of you and you're gonna be a hit.
Dre is a really social person. He loved people that know him from back then, before, you know, Andre was a super dude. He's still a dude from Compton and a loyal dude to, you know, his connections and his people. You know, if you're a part of his team, he's gonna look out for you.
More often than not, Dre's production know-how instincts paid off. But because of the time and energy he invested in producing for others, he developed a reputation as a perfectionist in the studio, as he pushed artists to achieve their highest potential whilst trying to discover their own signature perfect beat. In some cases, many of them didn't end up releasing any music due to Dr. Dre's pedantic tendencies.
His work ethic as far as in the studio, if you don't have that sound that just makes him say yay, you're gonna keep making hooks. The hook's not right, okay, we need to change the verse, okay, we need to add this. He's like that. And some people will be like, I mean, all you gotta do is put it out and they're gonna buy it. But he's not into that, just putting out music. He's like, I've seen Stack Quo not even come out with an album. He's giving him 3 checks. So that tells you what kind of guy he is. If you don't give him what he wants or that sound that he thinks that's gonna stamp and solidify his name with, he's not letting you put it out.
This not only affected other artists' developing careers, but it was later considered to have a stifling effect on his own creative process.
I remember interviewing Busta Rhymes about 10 years ago, and he was talking about Dr. Dre and working with him. And he'd signed to Aftermath and he'd released the Big Bang album, and Dre had produced some tracks for him. And he said, you know, Dre's got this vault in his studio, and it's got every track. On the one hand, as a fan, you're thinking, fantastic, you know, that's great. That means that at some point, maybe I'm gonna have to wait till I'm 70, but maybe someone will release a box set which has got most of this stuff on there. We'll hear the early versions or the alternate takes, or there'll be versions of classic tracks with different instrumentation on them, or we'll hear how these things came together, and that sort of thing would be absolutely fascinating. And it's great to know that it all exists. But on the other hand, you're thinking, if you're the producer sat there in the middle of that and you're living inside your own history, and it's vast, you probably don't even know exactly what's there. I mean, you know what's there, but you don't remember all of it. And maybe you're thinking, there's an idea that I had, I remember this idea and it was in that session, and you go back to the tapes and you're playing them over and over and over and trying to remember this thing, and you're gonna get confused or lost within your own past. And sometimes maybe as an artist, maybe you need to just say, look, you know, it's not gonna be perfect, but let's get it out there because it is what it is. Even if you're not 100% happy with it yourself, maybe that could be a positive step to take. Maybe that will be freeing you up from some of the pressure that you put yourself under and removing some of the burden that you've unwittingly, if you like, placed on your shoulders by drawing so much attention to one thing that probably hasn't even properly coalesced in your own mind yet.
Dr. Dre is a perfectionist, so much so that several of the artists he's worked with on his record label never actually got to finish their album because he never thought it was right or good enough. As a lyricist, Dr. Dre has never been considered a fantastic artist. His lyrics are very simple. He doesn't have the kind of poetic nature of someone like Jay-Z. He's not a brilliant writer when it comes to lyrics. What Dr. Dre is unbeatable at, however, is his skill as a producer. Watching him in the studio, people have said, is like watching a composer or an artist at work. Dr. Dre's greatest skill is that he can hear something that's genius, that someone has done, and he can pull it out of them, and he can kind of put it together into something that's amazing. In terms of music production, you would be hard-pressed to find a more successful or a more talented music producer than is Dr. Dre. He's a very famous perfectionist. In fact, Snoop Dogg said at one time he had made one rapper he was working with pull out one line 107 times. He had to repeat that lyric until Dre thought it was good enough.
What that seems to say is just to attest to Dre's perfectionism. But I would also question whether driving somebody to do something that many times would actually result in you getting something better at the end of it. I think there's an elastic limit with these things. If you're pushing somebody to get something that you can hear in your head and they can't get it right and it takes them 100 goes to get it, are you ever going to get to whatever it is that you think you want or that you think you hear in them? Is it going to be possible to get that out? I remember talking to the late Chicago soul singer Terry Callier, who said that his attitude in the studio was that you have to do it first time as if your life depends on it, because in many respects for an artist it really does. And if you're not putting everything you've got into that first take, why will it be better second time? Why will it be better third time? And certainly you wonder why it would be better the 100th time. So I think there'll be a law of diminishing returns would apply there. That maybe suggests that that record isn't going to work. And maybe that's when we get to the heart of why the projects like Detox just never saw the light of day. They've been worked on too much. It's possible to do that. Picasso is famously said something about never finishing a painting, just deciding to stop working on it. Perhaps Dre felt that if he kept doing more and more and trying harder and pushing further and getting more out of his people and insisting that each vocalist redid each take again and again and again, somehow that work ethic that he's got, that drive, would turn into art. But maybe it steamrollers the inspiration part out of it. And maybe that's what he was failing to hear when he gets to the end of the Detox project, as far as he sees it, and thinks it's not releasable, it's not ready, it's not good enough, because it's been worked on too much. So it can go too far. It can be a really positive, empowering, useful device for anybody engaged in any kind of creativity. But it could also steamroller the life out of any project that you're doing.
In 2002, Dre announced a third album that he planned to call Detox. The album suffered numerous delays as he began to focus more on moonlighting the musical careers of others. But was the failure to produce Detox a mere consequence of his perfectionism or a product of his ego?
Dr. Dre says he's his own worst critic, but is just too much of a perfectionist, and he labors over tracks for years sometimes, which is ridiculous. I mean, he must be OCD in a sort of way. He must be OCD, but you know, he's Dre. He was supposed to put out the Detox album, and he only released one single off it. It featured Eminem and Skylar Grey, and Skylar Grey really dominated the track, actually. And Skylar Grey should actually really have an album out produced by Dre, and he just kind of, I think after the Eminem experience, maybe he stopped from doing what he was going to do. But the Detox album is legendary, and he will put it out. He's saying he's done with Compton. With Compton, he's saying he's done, that this is it. You know, and when he starts talking to my diary, that he's done. But I think he will actually still put out Detox.
The protracted time Detox had taken to record, as well as the limited amount of material from the recording sessions, cursed the album with considerable notoriety within the music industry. Numerous release dates were given for the album over the years, although none of them turned out to be genuine.
He's always ended up talking about and promoting the next thing before the next thing's even really begun to take even the simplest, most basic initial shape. I really don't see how, as a creative person, that can be a healthy place for you to be in. Sometimes you just need to do what you've got to do, get the art out, and then tell the world about it once it's done.
Following 11 years of barren work on his Detox album, it was confirmed that the album was never to be released because of Dr. Dre's entrepreneurial ventures that had arguably interfered with his recording work. Dre then officially canceled the project, saying it did not meet his standards, and scrapped it as a result.
We then suddenly find Dre abandoning this, apparently, and instead, with the Compton record, we get something that is apparently as close as he's ever got to a sort of an instantaneous reaction to breaking news and current events. He's decided that the exercise that he had to go through for the making of the Straight Outta Compton film, of looking back at his past and seeing that past through other people's eyes, through the eyes of F. Gary Gray and the writers and the production team involved in this big production Hollywood movie about his life and his group's past, he starts to see himself in a different light, and he decides Detox has gone, he's scrapping it, and instead he's going to make a record that gets to the heart of what he was always all about, because he's been able to see that past come alive in a new way because of this creative process that he's been on with the film. So if we read that narrative at face value, and we see no reason not to, then we see Dre going from a stalled 15-year process of trying to make one record that he hasn't got anywhere with, that he's willing to let anyone hear, and instead abandoning that and coming up with something that by his standards is kind of dashed off in an afternoon almost. It's quick, it's going to be rough and ready. It's the past seen through the lens of the present, thrown into the studio today. It's unexpected, it's finished, it's surprise, it's out in the shops tomorrow. And you kind of wonder whether what he'd lost by working, overworking, reworking and working again through Detox, whether he's actually gained that much back by going completely in the opposite direction. Perhaps the better plan would have been somewhere in between the two extremes, but he seems to have gone from one extreme, and suddenly we get into Compton, which he says is put together quickly, rough and ready at the last minute, and I don't know that either of those is necessarily the best way for him.
In 2015, the N.W.A. drama Straight Outta Compton was released in theaters and instantly met with mixed reviews. It received criticism for not painting an accurate picture of N.W.A.'s earlier years, as well as omitting previous acts of violence against women, and for setting an unfair portrayal of people involved in making N.W.A.
The film of Compton, I'm waiting for it to come out on DVD, and I'll watch it. I won't have a problem watching it, because it's the story of N.W.A., supposedly. But I'm sure, it being Hollywood, it's sugar-coated. And as long as it's sugar-coated, I'm not really, that interested. If it's, considering the kind of nature of their records, it shouldn't really be sugar-coated. But that's Hollywood.
You have this group whose main contribution to the wider discussions about the society that they inhabit is to be those people who were telling these difficult stories. Regardless of how they came out of them, they were going to tell the truth as they saw it in their music. And you have a film that takes the real story of the band and works itself into knots, trying to sanitize parts of that story for not just for public consumption, because you'd imagine that the public going to see a film about N.W.A. would have at least a vague idea of who N.W.A. were, why they might be important, and therefore what sort of material they're likely to encounter in the film. But it seems almost designed to have burnished an image of Dre in particular as being a guy who basically could never do any wrong. It's not just the fact that incidents such as his physical abuse of at least 3 women that we know about in his life has entirely been omitted from the film. It's that when you see Dre interacting with women in the film, the Dre character that the film portrays is the diametric opposite of anybody who would ever have a physically abusive relationship with a woman. There's a very interesting and very confusing scene towards the beginning of the film where the teenage Dre character gets in an argument with his mum. He's missed a job interview because he's been absorbed in music. It's a brilliant scene in the sense of it gives you this idea of him being so caught up in the world of sound and understanding. It's a Roy Ayers record that he's playing, and it's very simply done, very beautifully shot, and you get this real sense of how he hears music in a more detailed way than you or I do, and he understands it and he gets inside it, and that's surely key to understanding how he has become this figure in music history. And then he has a row with his mum because he's missed a job interview because he's been sitting listening to the music, and his mum slaps him across the face, and he then sort of, there's a steeliness comes into the eyes and a coldness into the face, and he storms out and he goes off and forms N.W.A. Are you supposed to take from this the idea that if Dre in real life did do all these things that people say he's done to women, it's only because his mum used to hit him? I mean, I'm really confused about what that scene's for, if that's not what it's supposed to say. And that just strikes me as reprehensible and unforgivable. And coming from a band whose entire ethos was all about telling the truth no matter where it took them or left them, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't believe it, and I think it spoils the film because you're not able to really feel that what you're watching is as real as it says it is. And in a story about a band who are all about keeping it real, then it makes a mockery of the entire thing.
The film allegedly influenced the producer to abort the making of the Detox album in favor of an LP inspired by the film. Dre announced that he would be releasing a brand new album entitled Compton on August 7, 2015. The album features a number of collaborators from various points in his career, including Eminem, Snoop Dogg, Kendrick Lamar, Exhibit, and The Game, among others. It debuted at number 2 on the US Billboard 200, selling 295,000 units in its first week. When Compton was released, it received widespread acclaim from music critics.
The Compton album it's just excellent. I listened to it, I'm like, whoa. And then I realized that what he was doing, what Dr. Dre was doing, was actually going through chapters of his life in Compton.
While The Chronic in 2001 were able to cultivate and define both the landscape and counterculture that surrounded them, it's unclear whether his most recent Compton will be able to have the same impact.
It sounds very modern and it's very chopped up. It's very chopped up. It's only when you listen to it more than once that you start to realize what Dre himself does on the record and what the other featured rappers do on the record. It's only after repeated listenings that you realize. When you first hear it, it's just this barrage of whoa.
It was very well received by critics. It sold something like 250,000 units in the first week. It wasn't the kind of success that he had with some of his earlier work, but at the same time, it was very widely received. Dr. Dre said with the album Compton, he actually had 20 to 40 tracks for the album that he did not include because he didn't think they were good enough to make the cut. He's a notorious perfectionist and everything he does has to be just right.
That's what I am. I'm a record producer. I'm just a creative and innovative person that just love letting my creative juices flow in any way. So that's my love. You know, most of the time I have to get talked into performing on record or you know, performing in the videos and what have you, because I don't think that's my thing, and I don't think that's where my true talent lies.
As a producer, Dr. Dre is a visionary force of nature, and like a medic in a crisis situation, the young blood of hip-hop running through the industry still looks at Dr. Dre for guidance. Whenever hip-hop finds itself in an unstable commercial condition and in need of a stylistic maneuver, Dr. Dre performs under pressure and delivers every time. For no matter how long he looms in the background, his nation of listeners can hope that the detoxed power of Dr. Dre will surprise, once again, with another beat.
Hip-hop is never in danger of becoming too commercial, especially when you have artists and producers like myself out there, because I'm gonna always keep it raw and keep it street and keep it dirty, straight up, no matter what.